Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about two coping mechanisms that are two sides of basically the same coin. One of them is considered mostly used by women with autism, and the other is a general coping mechanism used by everyone. So what I'm talking about today is chameleoning and masking. I'm Leah Batlle-Rafferty, and this is Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. So let's start with the one that not everyone talks about, which is chameleoning. Granted, I want you all to remember that I am not a licensed professional. I had a degree in cognitive science, but it was a long time ago that I got it. And the DSM-4 or 5 or whatever number it's on right now is not something that I regularly read. So when you hear me talk about these symptoms, you're going to hear me talk about how I interpret the symptoms to play out in me. And we are all a spectrum, and they play out differently in different people. So just because they play out a certain way in me does not mean that they might not be different in you if you have them. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get started. All right, chameleoning. What is chameleoning? So I think of chameleoning as sort of the overall way that you blend even when you're not interacting with people. In my case, chameleoning is very unconscious. When I chameleon, I guess I always chameleon, I tend to pick up bits of things from other people. So for instance, there's someone at work who uses their hands a lot, and just, 2 months after getting to know them, suddenly I was catching myself every once in a while using their same hand movements. Now, this does not mean that I fully mimic them. It means that I take on little pieces of what seem like normal behavior and I incorporate them into my behavior in order to seem more normal. It also means that I don't stim. I don't even really stim in private anymore. And if you're wondering what stimming is, we will talk about it. Stimming is a key part of what it is to have certain types of neurodivergence. It's a lot harder to define what somebody's stim is. There's so many different types. But either way, a stim gives you away. Some people move hands or flap their arms or make noises or do all kinds of different things. And all of those, of course, set you apart. So possibly the very first thing you learn when you're chameleoning is to not stim in public. Another thing about chameleoning is it's kind of constant, but I don't think that it costs me spoons the same way masking does. So spoons. I want to do an episode on spoon theory. It was obviously not created by me. I don't have the references right now, though I will try to put them in the episode notes. But spoons are a way of describing how much energy or decision-making power you have left during the day. Chameleoning is sort of like an invisible armor that you put on during the day when you're just walking around. And like I said, I don't think it takes as many spoons. So I don't think I'm as exhausted just from chameleoning. It is frustrating in other ways. It's still not being my authentic self, but I don't know that there's anything that I could do about it unless I start my own company and go do my own thing, maybe on here, and stop trying to blend into an office environment or into the subway or into the street or, any other place where people might be seeing me. I've often considered it might be really freeing to just stop worrying. Not that I can really do that easily, but it might be. It might be nice to walk down the streets and stim and not think about what anyone else thinks. Okay, so chameleoning. Chameleoning, just like the term says, is blending into your environment. It has nothing to do with the interaction part of things. And it has more to do with how you fade into the background of everyone else. Just by being me, I could stand out. In fact, I did when I was younger. So we were talking about stems. My stem has always been singing. I was thinking that maybe on my Patreon, when I set this up, I will have like little threads of me randomly singing, and you can decide if it's like ridiculous or not. And then, obviously other content. But my stem was always singing, and I would walk around singing everywhere. And of course, most people don't walk around singing everywhere. I think in the 80s, it wasn't as bad because there were like boom boxes and music was loud and it was everywhere. And so people were constantly singing or at least listening to loud music. But as music became a more private thing, as it stopped being so open, people started to get irritated by someone else's music in their space. So I remember, I think it was on a T platform in Boston during college, and I was singing and I got scolded pretty loudly by a random person for it, and I stopped. I think that was the day I stopped. I don't think I have sung randomly walking around in a crowd or anything like that in a long, long time. Doesn't mean I don't do it in my car. Doesn't mean I don't do it at home. Doesn't mean that I don't like karaoke. But that kind of constant thread in my life of singing, I got beaten down enough about talent and all these other things that I stopped. There you go. So that's how my stem stopped. And I don't think I have ever picked it up again because it was not conducive to looking normal as I walked around. Other places where chameleoning comes in, the way you dress. So I feel like I don't really know what my personality is in outfits. And I know that my friends are going to be like, but we all know you like bright colors and you like things. And I'm like, yes, but no. Bright colors are part of my culture. And so I want to represent my culture. But is that really my style? I don't know. Geek shirts were my style for a while. In fact, I'm wearing a Doctor Who shirt today. I don't know if I'm supposed to give attribution to the BBC, but there you go. The BBC show, Doctor Who. I'm wearing one of their shirts today. The outfits that you need to wear for work, I think slacks and all of those things. It's hard when you've never really expressed yourself very strongly through clothing. You more looked for what was comfortable because, sensory things. And you kind of did the geek thing. Okay, fine. That expressed myself. But work clothes are like this enigma to me. Like, I have a friend who buys clothes. I get her help. I get clothes that I hope match and look right. I didn't even use necklaces until my 40s. I didn't know how to use necklaces. But you hear how I'm talking about it, right? Use necklaces. Use clothing. It's not about me. It's about the armor they represent and making me look like I belong in a situation and making me look like everyone else is normal. Or at least normal enough to pass. Other places where chameleoning comes in. The house. Yes, the house. So the way my house is laid out is not necessarily for me. It's for other people. I'm getting better at it. But most of my house is laid out in a way that is neurotypical. There's a dining room, there's a family room, there's a kitchen, there's the bedrooms, there's the guest room, there's, and I think if I weren't trying to make an impression, I can just imagine my dining room being painted with Mario. Or having I totally convinced my husband that downstairs we could have a D&D tavern. We even bought one of those cool gaming tables and everything for it. But upstairs, while there's games, while there's things that kind of set us aside a little bit, they're still well within sort of the acceptable spectrum of what it is to have a house. And we have our pool parties, and my husband smokes meat. And it's very Americana, right? And all of that, in some ways, is chameleoning. I don't know if any diagnosis book would call it that, but to me, yeah. All right, now let's talk about the other one that is the big deal, which is masking. Masking is exhausting. A lot of different neurodivergences have masking because how we interact with people is what gives us away the most. So masking to me, and I emphasize yet again to me, is how you navigate social interactions with other people in a way that makes you not stand out and follow the right rules. So I long ago started calling this like my templates for behavior, right? When I was little, there was no way I was going to sit with you through small talk. It's exhausting. And when does it end? And how do you take the cue that, okay, it's time to talk about the real thing? In Central American culture, it's even worse because everything is a social interaction. At least, in the US, business is done in kind of this very practical, sort of cold way. There's still relationships built, but it's not the same kind of in-depth relationship building that I see in Central America. So, in some ways, that's a saving grace for me when I'm working in business because it means that I don't have to have these in-depth social interactions every time. I've taught myself how to do the right amount of small talk. I've taught myself how when someone asks you a question, most of the time, they really don't want the answer. How are you today? Good. You should always answer good, unless it's somebody who you really, really know. I have taught myself the differences in interaction depending on the circumstance. So what does it look like at work with a coworker versus with friends when I have a party versus when I'm doing government stuff? I learned to use a lot of I statements. So this is where my degree has helped me a lot, right? I'm going to talk about emotions and negative emotions and exhaustion and stuff in another episode, but I have to navigate emotional situations very carefully. And so one of the things that they teach you in psychology is to de-escalate situations. You talk a lot in I statements and me statements and not you statements. Doesn't mean I don't mess up, of course, but I've been told in a lot of situations that, wow, you did a really great job navigating that. Well, it's because I am so freaking careful with I, me statements. The problem with masking, well, there's several problems with masking and chameleoning, but a big problem with masking is that it is a learned skill, right? So interactions with other people that most people do automatically, you learn to do through skill building, just like any other skill you learn, right? You learn how to do mathematics. Well, I learned how to interact with people. And that means that there's no innate template for when things go wrong. I may be able to interact with you very well at work. I have my template for that. I know exactly what to do, and I'm not perfect at it. I will never be perfect at it, but I'm good enough that nobody at work thinks badly of me. But then I run into you in the grocery store and suddenly I am frozen because I have no idea how to interact with you in that scenario. You're a coworker. Do I come say hi? Do I ignore? The ignoring seems rude. Do I say hi and then just kind of be like, okay, have a great time? What is it that you do when I see you in a context that I'm not used to seeing you? And the answer is, I don't know. And those situations are still hard. Now, comparing this at 49 versus how I was when I was 20, there's huge differences, right? So at 49, I can handle, I'll say 95% of all situations I'm in, right? I've got 30, 40 years of learning behind me. And I have a bunch of what I call templates, right? In this situation, you do this much small talk. You get right to business. These are your cues that you should be listening for. And this is how you need to react to those cues. However, when I was 20, a lot of these situations were hard. In my family, there's a lot of ADHD and a lot of autism. And because there is a lot of both, most of us have a little bit of symptoms of one, even if we're diagnosed with the other. And so when I was like in my 20s, one of the hardest things that I used to do was I would skip ahead in a conversation. I would have half the conversation in my head after having like talked to you a couple times. And then like we'd go back and forth once or twice. And then the conversation would just take off in my head. And then I would respond with where my head had gone instead of what the next step in the conversation is. And it's very hard to describe without an example, but I can't think of an example right now. Making one up, let's see. We're having a conversation about, I was in Boston, so we're having a conversation about the Charles River and the crew. And then I suddenly start remembering that, we needed a tetanus shot to get in the Charles River if you fall in, back in the day when I was there. And then that goes on to like, oh, there's a new flu shot clinic or something that is happening up the street. And then I look up and I say to the person, oh, we should probably go get a flu shot. And the person is staring at me because they were starting to talk about the crew practice. So that's just a very small example of something that my mind did all the time and that I had to learn to work against, to keep focus on the current conversation, to not let my attention stray. Another thing is I am kind of social. So a lot of people like me are a little bit more withdrawn. I am very introverted. There's no question about that. But I like talking to small groups of people. I don't like big situations, but small groups that I know really well. I like gaming. I like video games. I like board games. I like Dungeons and Dragon types games. So I do like interacting with small groups of people for short periods of time. And I would really enjoy it if it wasn't for the fact that I spend all day interacting with people in situations that are a little less than ideal, right? So what do I mean by that? What I mean is I'm doing pretty well for myself in business. I don't want to go into my background and all of that because this isn't really the podcast for that. But the point is I do well. I lead a team. I'm in technology. I hold my job down. I think I'm pretty well respected. I hope I am. But when you're in that situation, you're going to meetings. You're going to meetings, maybe 5 meetings a day, sometimes maybe more. You are context switching all the time. You are interacting with groups of very different people at each meeting who each have very different personalities, who are each expecting you to report in very different ways. And you have to keep that in mind for every interaction that you have during those meetings. So by the end of the day, I am exhausted. I have my templates. I have my understanding of particular people and how they interact in business. I have to mask a different way in each different meeting. And I come home and I'm done. I am totally done. Some people can work in the evening, late into the evening. Maybe if I was heads down and just doing tech, I could be all excited and work at 9 p.m. But I'm done. Emotionally, I'm drained, exhausted. I don't have the energy to hang out with anyone else at that point. I want my books. I want my bed. I want to hide. And that's what masking is, right? So it's this coping mechanism that helps you deal with the world at a big cost. And depending on how often you need to use it, it affects you more or less. Now, you might say, well, then why do things that involve a lot of people? Why not be heads down? Why not just work on a technology or something, or write a book in private or something like that? And I think this is where the differences in personality for anybody comes in, right? Like I said before, I'm a social person, but even more than that, I am an immigrant. I am a person who wants other people to be seen and heard and treated fairly, even within the business, right? And so in order to be able to champion that, I have to put myself in situations that force me to mask. And if I thought somebody else was championing that well, then maybe I could take a step back and not be as tired and be able to just do work. But I don't see that happening, and so I put myself out there. So yes, part of the exhaustion is completely my fault and my choice of jobs, but that doesn't make it any less exhausting. Other things about masking that I think people who are younger should know is that it really is a coping mechanism that eventually becomes its own problem. So I'm 49 years old, like I've said before, almost 50, and I know how I am, but I don't know who I am. And that's a weird distinction, but it's a very real one, right? I could not tell you under all the layers of, I guess, cellophane, masks, things that create armor to make me more acceptable in the world. I don't even know how to peel them away to figure out who I am at the bottom. And it's something that's been grating on me a little bit. Like, what would it be like to be able to just not mask? Would I go back to having the same sorts of conversations I had in my 20s? What sorts of interactions would I really want to have? How would I really dress? I know it sounds funny. Always been a jeans and t-shirt type person. You know, I'm a Gen Xer, but is that really how I would dress? What would I do with my entire day? I feel like what would I do with my entire day is another big question, right? Like, if I wasn't trying to blend in, if I wasn't trying to fit in with everybody, if I wasn't trying to meet whatever criteria for success is the normal criteria for success, what would my day look like? And would it be more relaxing? Would I feel more energy at the end of the day? Would I be more socially anxious, right? Because masking balances out in a way with social anxiety. If I'm masking, then I'm socially acceptable. If I'm not masking, then people will talk about me. And I think in my 20s, I cared about that more than I care about it now, but I still care. So that is my mental model on masking. Masking is a coping mechanism that allows you to do these things and fit into normal society in order to meet the criterias of that society's success, in order to have friends that are kind of meeting the definition of what friendship is in normal society, in order to feel like people aren't judging you all over the place. But at the same time, masking and chameleoning, they make you behave differently, act differently. They sort of cover up your authentic self, and you're left with so many layers of it. It's really hard to tell what's underneath. And I don't have any advice for this. So if any of you who have, gone through this have thoughts about what is the best way to find yourself underneath the coping mechanisms that you've used for most of your life, I would love to chat about it. That said, there is nothing wrong with employing these coping mechanisms to reach the success that you are looking to reach, whatever that success is, whatever it means, because at least I don't have or didn't have good self-esteem when I was in my 20s, right? I felt like, imposter syndrome obviously was a very real thing, but so was feeling sort of outside of every social situation. And now I'm not there. The self-esteem piece, at least, grew with the knowledge that I got the success that I was told was important. And I pre-phrase that with I was told because I think I based a lot of my ideas of success on my father's wishes for me when I was younger, once again on what society said success was, on trying to navigate this like border of intellect and emotional interactions. And I did it. I mean, I'm on the other side now. So it worked. It's just now the coping mechanism has morphed into the thing that I want to figure out how to dismantle, because I don't know if my vision of success when I was younger is still my vision of success now. And this podcast is so that you can hear me ramble about these things and consider what it looks like on the other side if you're just starting out in the process, or think about whether you're struggling with similar things, or consider that we can be successful. That's something that the world makes it seem like it's almost impossible, but we can be successful. We can do really well. Some of us will be successful by being really good at like one particular thing, and they'll be surrounded by people who will call them a genius. And so the absent-minded professor trope is absolutely okay. And especially societally gender-based in men, it's considered okay. For women, the absent-minded professor trope doesn't work. Trust me, because I was one. that was me. I was the absent-minded professor. And you learn that as a woman, social interactions are what you're expected to excel in, even as you excel in technology and in kind of the hard sciences and things like that. It's very interesting. You're not left alone to just succeed in one arena. You kind of have to succeed in multiple. So masking gets you there. Chameleoning gets you there. So it's okay. Thank you for tuning in to Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. This podcast was written, edited, and produced by me, Leah Batlle-Rafferty. All music is by Carlos Neda, and this podcast is part of Labrat Solutions, Inc.